The streets of Al-Jara were unusually quiet that evening, the desert winds carrying whispers that seemed to know secrets no one else dared speak. In this small Kuwaiti town, life often moved at a slow pace, its tranquil exterior masking a much darker undercurrent. Beneath the surface, envy, betrayal, and greed festered, hidden behind closed doors and hushed conversations. And at the center of it all was the Al-Fahad family, a name that commanded respect and fear across Kuwait. Their wealth and influence seemed to touch every corner of the country, but with power came danger, and for the Al-Fahads, the cost of their legacy was about to be paid in blood. Abdul Rahman Al-Fahad, the family patriarch, was a man whose power was as unyielding as the desert sun. He controlled a vast business empire, ranging from oil to luxury goods, and had connections that could bend the law. At 65, he was sharp, shrewd, and feared, but his health was waning, and he knew time was no longer on his side. His eldest son, Khaled, was the obvious heir to the empire, a calculated, ambitious man who mirrored his father's cunning. Khaled, however, had his own demons. His marriage to the beautiful but enigmatic Layla was a facade of perfection. Layla, with her dark almond eyes and soft-spoken demeanor, harbored her own secrets, a complexity that neither Khaled nor anyone in the family truly understood. The Al-Fahad family also included the younger siblings, Sarah, the fiercely independent daughter who had chosen to pursue law instead of staying confined within the family's traditional expectations, and Faisal, the black sheep of the family, who spent most of his time indulging in nightlife and scandals that stained the family name. Completing the circle was Amal, Abdul Rahman's loyal secretary of 20 years, a woman who had become almost family herself, though she carried a quiet bitterness that only those close enough could sense. Then there was Nasser, the family driver, whose eyes missed nothing. He was quiet, dependable, and treated like a servant, but his knowledge of the Al-Fahad family's inner workings made him more dangerous than they realized. The tension in the Al-Fahad household grew palpable as Abdul Rahman summoned his family for an important announcement. They gathered in the sprawling family estate, a palace of marble and gold that exuded wealth but felt cold and hollow. Khaled and Layla arrived together, though their strained silence spoke volumes. Sarah was late, as usual, her independent streak evident even in her disregard for punctuality. Faisal sauntered in with a smug grin, the smell of cologne and cigarette smoke clinging to him. Amal stood quietly in the corner, her ever-watchful eyes darting between the family members, and Nasser waited outside, ready to step in if needed. Abdul Rahman entered the room, leaning heavily on his cane. The air grew heavier as he began to speak. "I'm not a young man anymore," he said, his voice gravelly. "It's time to decide the future of this family." His announcement was simple but powerful. He planned to divide his empire equally among his children. For Khaled, who had always seen himself as the rightful sole heir, it was a blow. For Faisal, it was an undeserved blessing. Sarah, though uninterested in wealth, saw it as a way to break free from her father's grip. But the biggest shock came when Abdul Rahman mentioned that Amal would receive a share as well. The room erupted into chaos. Khaled argued that Amal was nothing more than an employee. Faisal laughed at the absurdity, and even Sarah raised her eyebrows in disbelief. Amal, for her part, remained composed, though a flicker of satisfaction crossed her face. Abdul Rahman silenced them with a single raised hand. "This is my decision. Question it, and you'll find yourself cut off entirely." The family dispersed, but the tension lingered. Khalid retreated to his study, his mind racing. Layla followed, but she didn't speak. Her presence was more a reminder of her discontent than support. Faisal made his way to a nearby bar, drowning his thoughts in whiskey and flirting with strangers. Sarah went back to her apartment, determined to distance herself from the chaos, and Amal returned to her modest home, where she poured herself a glass of wine and allowed a rare smile to escape. The following day, Abdul Rahman's lifeless body was discovered in his study. His cane lay on the floor, his face frozen in an expression of surprise. The police arrived quickly, and it didn't take long to confirm that his death was no accident. He had been poisoned. The news sent shockwaves through the community, but within the Al-Fahad household, it ignited a storm. Inspector Jassim, a seasoned detective known for his unorthodox methods, was assigned to the case. He arrived at the Al-Fahad estate with a small team and immediately began questioning the family. Khaled was the first to be interrogated, his frustration evident. "I had nothing to gain from my father's death," he said, though his clenched fists told a different story. Layla, when questioned, was evasive. She spoke in measured tones, her words carefully chosen. "Abdul Rahman was a complicated man," she said, her eyes darting toward Khaled, as if seeking approval. "But I respected him." Faisal was a mess. His alibi was shaky, and his erratic behavior only added to the suspicion. "Why would I kill him? He was giving me money," he shouted, though his bloodshot eyes and trembling hands betrayed his nerves. Sarah was calm but defensive. "I had no interest in the inheritance," she said firmly. "I've built my own life." But her independence, while admirable, didn't exempt her from suspicion. Amal, perhaps the most composed of them all, seemed almost too perfect. "I was at home all night," she said, her voice steady. "Abdul Rahman trusted me, and I would never betray him." But Inspector Jassim couldn't shake the feeling that her loyalty masked something deeper. Nasser, who had always been in the background, became an unexpected focal point. His quiet demeanor and proximity to the family made him a potential suspect. "I drive them around, that's all," he said simply. But Jassim wasn't convinced. As the investigation progressed, secrets began to unravel. A hidden affair between Layla and Faisal came to light, shaking Khaled to his core. Sarah's recent legal case involved a company owned by Abdul Rahman, suggesting a conflict of interest. Amal's bank account showed a suspicious deposit that couldn't be explained, and Nasser was overheard making a cryptic phone call in the middle of the night. Each clue deepened the mystery, and Jassim found himself entangled in a web of lies and half-truths. But the one thing he knew for certain was that the killer was among them. As the sun set over Al-Jahra, the desert winds carried whispers of a truth that refused to be buried. The murder of Abdul Rahman Al-Fahad was a cold and calculated crime, yet every passing day felt like a puzzle piece slipping further out of reach for Inspector Jassim. The Al-Fahad family's intricate network of deceit, resentment, and hidden alliances twisted deeper than he had imagined. Despite the layers of complexity, one undeniable fact stood before him. Someone in that house had killed Abdul Rahman, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. The investigation had turned into a personal obsession for Jassim. Late nights at the station, combing through evidence, and endless interviews with the family had taken their toll. But the one thing that gnawed at him was the notion that everyone had a motive. Each member of the Al-Fahad family had something to gain from Abdul Rahman's sudden demise, whether it was wealth, revenge, or power. He felt like a mouse in a trap, surrounded by individuals who were more adept at hiding their secrets than revealing their truths. Jassim's first priority was to re-examine the alibis of the main suspects. Khaled had insisted that he was in his study when his father died, working on a business deal. However, there was no one to verify his whereabouts, and no CCTV footage that could corroborate his claim. Lila, his wife, had stated she was in bed, though no one had seen her that night, and the few servants who were still in the estate were either too nervous or too loyal to speak up. Faisal's alibi was equally thin. He claimed to be at a local bar, but there were no records of his presence, and his erratic state the next morning suggested a different story. Amal had proven more elusive than the rest. Her financial records, a point of contention, seemed almost too perfect. She had been Abdul Rahman's secretary for over 2 decades, a trusted confidant with a deep knowledge of his financial dealings. Her apparent devotion to Abdul Rahman only made her seem more suspicious. Jassim couldn't help but feel that Amal had more to hide than she was letting on. Then, there was Nasser, the quiet family driver, who had been largely overlooked by the others but had his own share of mysteries. His seemingly insignificant position in the family masked a role that might have been far more critical than anyone imagined. Jassim's breakthrough came when he received a tip from a former employee of the Al Fahad estate. The man, once a high-ranking executive in Abdul Rahman's company, had left under mysterious circumstances a few years ago. He had been dismissed after falling out with Abdul Rahman over a business venture, but now he reached out with vital information. The tip-off was cryptic, but important. Someone in that house knows the truth. Find the family secret, and you'll find the killer. It was a vague clue, but it was enough to send Jassim on a new course. The family secret was the key. What was it? A hidden affair? A financial misstep? A betrayal that was too deep to forgive? He began to investigate Abdul Rahman's past dealings with renewed vigor, determined to uncover the skeleton that had remained locked away for so long. Days passed, and the walls seemed to close in on the family. Khaled grew increasingly hostile towards the investigation, his temper becoming more unpredictable. He had always been the one in control, but now, with his father's empire in jeopardy, his cool composure was cracking. Jassim, in his quiet observations, noted the growing friction between Khaled and Layla. They spoke less, their exchanges curt and fraught with unspoken words. Layla, on the other hand, seemed to retreat further into herself. She had always been an enigma, but now her beauty, once a symbol of her power, seemed to fade in the wake of her husband's uncertainty. The graceful woman who had once charmed all those around her now appeared as a figure cloaked in sorrow, her eyes often distant and lost. She avoided Jassim's gaze whenever he questioned her, but something about her demeanor gave him pause. There was a heaviness in her heart, a pain that she refused to reveal. Faisal, unable to escape his own demons, continued to spiral into his own reckless behavior. His attempts to act as though nothing had changed felt like a facade, and Jassim's patience with him began to wear thin. One night, Faisal was found drunk in a parking lot, muttering to himself about an argument he had had with Abdul Rahman just before his death. Jassim had heard of the tension between father and son, but the details were murky. Faisal was known to be impulsive, and his temper often flared at the slightest provocation. Could he have killed Abdul Rahman in a fit of rage? The idea lingered in Jassim's mind, but something told him that the situation was more complicated than that. Sarah was the most composed of them all. Her calm and detached nature made it almost impossible to read her. She had no love for the family's wealth, but that didn't make her immune to the motivations that had driven the others. Her quiet defiance, her decision to forge her own path, made her a potential threat to Khaled's plan of consolidation. Jassim began to wonder if Sarah might have wanted to prevent her father from handing over the reins to Khaled, but that didn't explain the motive for murder. Amal continued to remain the most inscrutable figure in the family. Jassim had been watching her closely, and every time he questioned her, she had an answer. The calm confidence in her voice made it impossible to catch her in a lie. She had always been there, loyal, watching the family's every move. But was it loyalty, or had she been playing a longer game? The key, Jassim realized, lay in the family's history. Abdul Rahman was a man of wealth, but his success hadn't come without sacrifices. There were whispers about a past that Abdul Rahman had kept hidden from his children, a time when he had made decisions that could have destroyed everything. As Jassim dug deeper into the family's past, he uncovered a long-forgotten scandal. Abdul Rahman had once been involved in a shady business deal with a Kuwaiti arms dealer. The deal had been messy, dangerous, and ultimately unsuccessful. But the arms dealer, a man named Yasser al-Sharif, was still alive and had a score to settle with Abdul Rahman. The two had parted ways with bitter animosity, and rumors had circulated that Abdul Rahman had stolen from Yasser. Jassim began to wonder if Yasser had returned to exact revenge. But why now, after all these years? The puzzle pieces were coming together, but there was still one piece missing: the identity of the killer. Jassim knew that someone in the house had worked with Yasser. There was a traitor in their midst. Then, on the fourth day of the investigation, a shocking twist came to light. A maid who had been working in the household for just a few weeks came forward with new information. She had seen Nasser, the family driver, in the study late that night, just moments before Abdul Rahman was found dead. He had been acting strangely, she said, muttering to himself. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, in the light of the investigation, it seemed far more sinister. Nasser had been quiet, dependable, a shadow in the background. But the maid's testimony brought him into the forefront. Had he been working with Yasser all along? Did he poison Abdul Rahman in exchange for something more than money? Jassim couldn't shake the thought. Nasser had access to everything: Abdul Rahman's schedule, the estate's inner workings, the family's darkest secrets. His position had been the perfect cover. The detective realized that the final answer had been staring him in the face all along. The killer was someone who had the most to gain by controlling the family's legacy. Someone who had played both sides, loyal and treacherous. Nasser was the key, but Jassim was wrong. As he gathered his team and prepared to confront Nasser with the evidence, a sudden phone call shattered everything. It was from the maid. "She's dead," she whispered. In that moment, Jassim understood. He had been led down a false trail, and now the real killer was about to strike again. The case had taken an unexpected turn. Jassim stood still, frozen, as the words from the maid echoed in his ears. "She's dead." He had been on the verge of solving the case, thinking he had the killer in his grasp, but now it seemed the truth was slipping further away, as if the shadows had deepened even more. The maid had been found lifeless in her small quarters near the estate. Her death, like Abdul Rahman's, had the hallmark of precision, cold calculation, and, perhaps most chilling of all, it was clear that whoever had done this wanted to keep their secrets buried forever. Jassim didn't need to say a word to his team, but the tension in the air was palpable. They were all moving quickly now, headed straight for the maid's quarters, and every step felt heavier with dread. They arrived to find the small room just as they had left it, neat, almost too neat. But there was no time for such details now. What mattered was the body, lying face up on the floor, as though she had been placed there deliberately, her eyes wide open, frozen in fear. Jassim felt a shiver run down his spine as he approached the body. There were no signs of violence, no bruises, no marks, but the stillness of the woman's face and the unnatural peace that seemed to hang over her told him something much darker. The more he observed, the more he realized that she had died from poisoning, just like Abdul Rahman. But why? What had she known that made her a target? As the investigation team began to process the scene, Jassim felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He was so close, yet so far. He had thought Nasser was the key, but now it seemed the killer was still out there, one step ahead of them. He had to rethink everything. The maid was a recent addition to the staff, which meant she had learned something in her short time at the Al Fahad estate, something that had gotten her killed. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing a bigger picture, that there were pieces of the puzzle they hadn't uncovered yet. But what were they? Who else had a motive, a reason to act so violently? And more importantly, who would go to such lengths to protect the family's darkest secrets? As Jassim was deep in thought, his phone rang, cutting through the tension. It was a call from the medical examiner. The results were in, and they were more troubling than he had expected. The maid had been poisoned with the same toxin that had been used to kill Abdul Rahman, and it had been administered in a very similar manner, through her food. This was no coincidence. Someone was deliberately erasing any trace of the truth. But who was it, and why? The clues were starting to form a clearer picture, but it was still a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Jassim's mind raced through the possibilities. Was it Nasser, after all, driven by some deep resentment against the Al-Fahad family? Or was there someone else, someone closer to Abdul Rahman, who had the knowledge and the opportunity to carry out these murders? The answer came when Jassim decided to re-examine the family's financial records. He had already looked into Abdul Rahman's business dealings, but there was one person who had access to everything, the person who had the power to manipulate, hide, and erase records with ease: Amal. Amal had been Abdul Rahman's secretary for years, trusted with every document, every deal, every secret. She had been there when Abdul Rahman's empire was built, and she had been there when it was beginning to crumble. The more Jassim thought about it, the more he realized that she was at the heart of this. She was the key to everything. He requested a meeting with her immediately, and the tension in the air was unbearable as she entered his office. Her calm demeanor was the same as ever, but now Jassim saw her in a new light. Amal had been playing a dangerous game, and it was clear that she was not just a passive observer in the family's drama. She was an active participant, one who had the most to gain from Abdul Rahman's death, and now, it seemed, she had taken steps to ensure that no one would uncover the truth. As the interview began, Jassim wasted no time. He confronted Amal with the evidence he had gathered: the maid's death, the poisoning, and the financial records that pointed to her involvement. But Amal remained unfazed, her eyes never wavering from his. She smiled, a thin, knowing smile, as though she had been expecting this moment all along. "You think you know everything, don't you?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with a sharp edge. "But you don't. You have no idea what really happened, or who is really behind all of this." Jassim's heart skipped a beat. He had heard that tone before, too many times, in fact. It was the tone of someone who knew more than they were letting on. Someone who was hiding something far darker than anyone could imagine. "You've been covering your tracks well, Amal," Jassim replied, trying to maintain control of the conversation. "But the truth always comes to light. Abdul Rahman's death, the maid's death. It's all connected to you, isn't it?" Amal paused, her eyes narrowing. For a moment, Jassim thought she might deny it, but then, without warning, she laughed. It was a soft laugh, almost a whisper, but it chilled him to the bone. "You're right, Inspector," she said, her voice now filled with a dangerous calm. "It is connected to me, but it's not just me. The entire family is complicit in this, every single one of them. They all have their own secrets, their own reasons for wanting Abdul Rahman dead." Jassim's mind raced as Amal continued, revealing details he had never imagined. She spoke of Abdul Rahman's hidden affairs, his greed, and his manipulation of the family. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. "You want to know who killed him?" Amal asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It wasn't Nasser. It wasn't Khaled. It wasn't Lila or Faisal. It was me." Jassim froze. He had not expected this. He had suspected Amal, but hearing her confess in such a calm, detached manner sent a shockwave through him. She had killed Abdul Rahman and the maid. But why? Amal's smile twisted into something darker. Abdul Rahman was a man who believed he could control everyone around him. But he made one mistake. He underestimated me. I knew his secrets. I knew about his dealings with Yasser al-Sharif, and I knew that his empire was crumbling. The debts were piling up, and he had no intention of paying them back. So I made sure he didn't have the chance to destroy everything we had worked for. Jassim couldn't believe what he was hearing. Amal had killed Abdul Rahman to protect the family's fortune, to maintain the power that she had fought so hard to gain. But there was something more to it, something deeper that he hadn't yet uncovered. "And the maid?" Jassim asked, his voice barely a whisper. "She knew too much," Amal replied, her eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. "She overheard a conversation between me and someone from Abdul Rahman's past. She became a liability, so I removed her, just like I removed Abdul Rahman." Jassim felt the weight of her words sink in. He had been chasing the wrong person all along. Amal had orchestrated the entire thing, playing everyone in the family like pawns in a deadly game. But just as he was about to make the arrest, a voice echoed from the doorway. It was Khalid. "You've got it all wrong, Amal," Khalid said, his voice cold and steady. "I'm the one who killed him." Jassim turned, his heart pounding in his chest. What was happening? The twists were becoming too much to process. Amal, the calm and calculating mastermind, had been overshadowed by Khalid's confession. But was he lying? Or was there a deeper, more sinister truth waiting to be uncovered? As Jassim prepared for what would be the final confrontation, the door to the room swung open and Layla stepped in. She looked at Khalid and Amal, her eyes cold and distant. "You both think you can control this family," she said, "but I've already made my move." The room fell silent as the truth, as complicated and twisted as it was, began to unravel. Jassim realized then that the family's darkest secrets would never fully be exposed. There would always be one more twist, one more shadow hiding in the mist. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling crime mysteries, where the lines between truth and deception blur into a deadly game. Thanks for watching.